Okay, part two of my collection. First up, a great novel in the Waverley series by Sir Walter Scott called The Heart of Midlothian. And this is a very entertaining and wonderful read. I recommend it to anyone who likes to read books that not only make you think, but you see the action and all that. A lot of battles, a lot of heartbreak. Good stuff. Scott is an excellent writer. Once he famously wrote that he only wrote for money. So did Alexandre Dumas, the great French writer who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers and all that good stuff. So I guess writing for money isn't a bad thing, because we got the two guys that claimed it and were very good at it. This is an excellent edition by Collins. It was, I think, printed in 1952. In the frontispiece, you have a really nice pencil portrait of Sir Walter Scott, and 1952. You also have a little biography of him, talking about his writing career and other stuff. Then you have an introduction, and then you have Walter Scott introducing the book. Walter Scott, again, a great writer, very entertaining, very knowledgeable. He just wasn't a mercenary. He was a very educated man. I mean, and his books were loved in the 19th century, in the early 19th century to the mid, around the 18 between, I think, 1802 to 1820. He was the rave. Everybody loved him, and his books were very popular, and they still are. I mean, they're still pretty good. The next book up is going to be The Adventures of Haji Baba of Isfahan by James Morier. And let me tell you, this book is kind of damaged. It's a Everyman edition. J.M. Dent, of course, who did it. It's taped up here. I kept it because it is such an entertaining read. Here it is, right there. And Sir Walter Scott, God bless him, wrote an appreciation preface for this book when it was first published, this is not a first published, but they kept it for this edition. And this book, again, I highly recommend it. It's very entertaining. It's Walter Scott meets the Arabian Nights. It's very well done. Hopefully you can find a better edition than I have, but it's still workable, and I was still able to read it. All right, next up is The Fall of the Roman Republic. We went from the senatorial dictators to the populares, who were called dictators, who were very popular with the people, but not so popular with the aristocratic class, the senatorial class. And it starts with Gaius Marius, who was a great general who fought the Marian Wars, which are also called the Civil Wars. And he's a very successful military leader, very charismatic. One of his captains, much lower rank, was Julius Caesar, and there was a famous anecdote where a guy was talking to another guy, and he goes, "Well, what do you think about this Julius Caesar guy?" And he goes, "He's 10,000 Gaius Marius. Meaning that he's going to be in the future when he gets." When he gets his feet under him, he's probably going to be a greater Gaius Marius, and his words proved true. Even though Gaius Marius was a great military leader, and both these men both Gaius Marius and Julius Caesar built their political career on military victories. Caesar in Gaul, and of course Marius in the Marian Wars. Here in this edition, you have basically the transition from the Republic to the imperial regime, which starts with Julius Caesar, who was the first emperor, who was assassinated, and then Pompey, and then the other guy. No, not Pompey, but then another guy took over. Augustus took over the birthright. But it starts with Mars and it ends with Cicero. And I just have to say something about Cicero. Cicero was an incredible hypocrite. I mean, he was part of the senatorial class. He was for a dictatorship, but a dictatorship of a class. Whereas, Marius and Caesar wanted to be powerful leaders, but they wanted to serve the people. Now, of course, they served their own interests too, but, I think they were a little bit better than the senatorial class, because the senatorial class was kind of asinine. Okay, next up is Procopius, History of the Wars. These are the Goth, and this edition, mainly book 5 to book 6, focuses on, it's a Loeb Classic edition, focuses on the Gothic Wars between, basically in a period of time, the Byzantine Roman Empire period, 4th, 5th century, 6th, 7th AD. We're talking about wars against the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, who were always pains in the asses to the Romans, who wanted to exact their power over Europe proper, and also in Libya and other places too, where the Goths were. And this is a very detailed work, a lot of details, not much, a little bit of some stories. He's not an historian like Herodotus or any of the great Greek historians, but he is a good historian. A lot of great information about the Gothic Wars. If you're into history and the nuts and bolts of it, you'll like this book. If you're into history for the adventure and the stories, it's still okay, but it's not exactly a great exemplar. Here's another book. This is a classic, The Perfumed Gardens by Sheikh Nefzawi. And I will tell you that this book is very detailed about sexual anatomy, sexual practices, certain ways to cure certain things like impotence for a time. It gets down to the brass tacks of even talking about what kind of vaginas a man should prefer. And according to the author, the best vaginas are the ones with a little fat around them, And there's one line where he talks about a very thin girl with a thin pelvis with not a lot of meat around the bone down there in the pelvic area. He says, "God save me from a woman like that, because she will bring me no pleasure." And I thought that was a hoot. Okay, next up is Search for a Method by Jean-Paul Sartre. And this is a philosophical work that is much different than Being in Nothingness, and much better and much shorter, which is a blessing. And this book basically leads up to the critique of dialectical reasoning and dialectical reason. And this is a serious philosophical work. It's not so literary, and it's not so into It's basically the beginning of his break from existentialism, because he felt it was too literary and too there was no rigor to it. It wasn't rigorous enough as an examination of human experience and human life, and also ascertaining the reality of the world. So he felt he had to write this as the beginning of that process. It's a very good book, probably one of his more serious books, other than the 2 volumes of the Critique of Dialectical Reasoning, which I have, and that are very good books. Okay, next up, oh my God, another French one, and this is a nice portrait, very lovely lady here. This isn't a portrait of Georges Sand, and that's who wrote this, and it's called Mauprat. And Mauprat is about a young man who was young boy or transitioning into man who wasn't raised properly, kind of a savage-like, but not exactly a savage, not totally a savage. And he finds himself in a commune with a group of people who are practicing educational reforms and stuff like that. And they find him and they raise him and they basically teach him right, and they construct him into a man into a full-blown cultured man. And this is a story that she's going through, and it's a story of transformation, and it's also about love too. because there's a lot of love in education. I mean, I'm not talking about, like movies where you have professors falling in love with students. Nothing like that, but showing the love, the intellectual love of teaching a person knowledge and getting them knowledge, and also pointing them to knowledge that they can learn, that they can ascertain themselves. There's love in that. And this book really touches on that very well, and it's very well written. Sand writes great. She's a great writer. And the translations, Oxford Classics editions, much like the Penguin editions, the translations are always excellent because they're able to pay money for great translators. And I highly recommend this book. It's really good, and it'll really give you a depth of knowledge about what education is really supposed to be about, in my opinion. People can differ with that. That's okay. Okay, next up is a kind of a sad and dour tale, which is very well written by Elizabeth Gaskell, called Mary Barton. It's one of her earlier novels, and this is an Everyman edition, printed in 19... bought it for $2. Printed in 1964, and it's basically about working life in Manchester, England at the time. And it's kind of, pardon that, it's kind of a working class novel that's very well written. Gaskell is a great writer. She's very good at telling stories, and she's very good at describing characters, much like George Sand. And it's a pretty excellent book. Okay, here we go. This is another excellent book, Penguin Classics edition, pretty new. The Black Tulip by Alexandre Dumas, the same guy I was talking about earlier. He wrote for money, but he wrote good books. This is about a time of turmoil in the Dutch area there, and they were going through tulip mania, and there was this famous the black tulip was a something that they were searching for, and he constructed a story out of this from a real historical incident, and it starts off with the when the people are protesting and revolting, and they tear to pieces the two leaders of their country. And this is a very good novel. It's very well written, as all Dumas works are. It's a work of history, loosely based on history, as Dumas are always wanting to fancy it up and stuff. It's pretty good. I really like it. Tulip mania, plus you have upheaval, and the first scene is a very very shockingly violent scene. Okay, next up we have Mademoiselle de Maupin by Gautier. Théophile Gautier. And tacked on as one of Cleopatra's Knights, which is but again, Mademoiselle de Maupin is a very sumptuous, one of my favorite words, work. Very well written. It's almost like a poetic novel of a very glamorous and aesthetically keen woman who has a coterie of admirers and other things, and they have conversations and stuff, and they discuss aesthetic matters. It's a very excellent book. I would highly recommend it. Very well written. And that'll be the end for today. Again, all these books I recommend, of course, because I have them. If I had a least favorite of all these, it would be Character and Culture by Freud, which I skipped over because he's applying psychoanalysis to cultures, and that's really sloppy, and I don't think it goes anywhere. And it's kind of clumsy. And again, it's kind of Eurocentric bigotry. And that's all. Take care and have a wonderful day.